This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is legendary rock journalist Steve Rosen. He has finally released his long-awaited book about the friendship he shared with the late iconic rock guitar player Edward Van Halen. Now in its third printing, the book is titled Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen, and chronicles the writer's remarkable relationship in the beginning, 1977, before the release of Van Halen's first album, and continuing through 2003. Rosen, who has previously authored 7 other books, including biographies on Jeff Beck, Free, Bad Company, Black Sabbath, and Randy Rhoads, writes about what it was like being friends with the greatest guitar player in the world. Not an easy task to undertake. In order to tell the story accurately, Rosen poured over hours of interviews, all recorded and cataloged on cassette, and peered deep inside distant memories to create a book unlike any other out there. The journalist spent many hours with Edward in his own Hollywood Hills guest house up at Van Halen's 5150 studio, on airplanes, in cars, and even jamming on several occasions with Ed. There is no other book out there that captured the heart and creativity of the late master instrumentalist. Rosen was Edward's close friend for many years, and no other writer can lay claim to that title. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen, is available on hardcover, 580-page with 7x10 format. Front and back covers were shot by the iconic Van Halen photographer Neil Zollerer, who was provided interior photographs. It's a pleasure to have you on, Steve.
Thank you, Catherine. What a wonderful intro. Who wrote all of that great stuff?
Wow, it's amazing. You know, this is my second time speaking with you, and I can't be more appreciative because, like many, I was a fan of Van Halen. Like many, I was a fan of Eddie Van Halen. Most of all of those albums were a staple in my years growing up in high school. It's just a special time for many fans, a special time for many people that actually knew Edward like you. So I'm excited to tell everyone that your book is now available on an audio file as well. And this interview will encompass actual audio of your conversations with Eddie.
Exactly. And yes, I'm so happy to be here for a second time. You've been so wonderful in supporting me and Toe Chaser. And just briefly, yes, there are 2 audiobooks out. So the first audiobook came out, I guess it's been out about a year now. And what that was is I did the main narration, and I actually had to, I thought about that. Do I bring in another narrator, some professional? I thought, you know what? I was there. I'm writing the words. I need to speak this, So that was a difficult chore, finding the right balance in my voice and all that stuff. And the second thing I was going to do is I was going to read in my voice. It was all the interviews that are in the hardback, I was going to narrate. And I started doing that. I thought, this is ridiculous. Why don't I use the actual interviews I recorded with Edward, dating back, my gosh, it's close to 50 years now, some of those older ones, and use his voice. So I painstakingly, with a friend of mine, Adam Roach, inserted, cleaned, edited all these interviews, all these hours of interviews I did with Edward in the audiobook. And I don't believe any other audiobook has ever done that, where they've actually embedded the actual interviews of the subject. It's always a narrator speaking, all the text. And the second audiobook, which came out in January, I believe, of this year, I've called Van Halen's Voices, which is basically interviews with sort of the people in Edward's orbit. So there are interviews with Michael Anthony and Alex Van Halen and David Lee Roth. Sammy Hagar, Gary Sharon, who are all in the band, obviously, plus a lot of friends and people who were promoting his shows, and just people that were important in his world. And yeah, the two audiobooks are out there, and honestly, I think they're pretty remarkable. There's nothing else out there like those. So I'm very proud of them.
Wow. Well, I'm very proud of you because I know how much it takes just to write a book and then to be able to kind of collaborate all of the files and picking out what conversations you felt were more important than others or which felt more aligned to your real memories of him. Where are these audio books available? Like, how can be the best way for the fans to download them or to purchase them?
Excellent question. So you can find the audiobooks on mysoundwise.com. One word, mysoundwise, SOUNDWISE.com. And both audiobooks are available there. And honestly, I've tried to price them really reasonably. So that first audiobook, where I'm doing the narration. I mean, that audiobook is about 21 hours long. Most audiobooks are about 10 hours long. And I think I priced it at like $39.99 or something, which is really reasonable. And the second audiobook, I think, is $14.99. And that's about, I think it's 12 or 15 hours. So I really wanted to make them available. I really wanted people to hear them. So yeah, go check them out. Mysoundwise.com. I think Van Halen fans will really dig them for sure.
Well, that's great. So once they go to that website and they make the purchase, they download the file. It actually gets saved to their phone or to their device. Is that correct? Then they just keep playing it over as many times as they want.
That is absolutely correct. And again, I am not a technical person whatsoever, but yes, I think they have to go there, and then I think they download the My Soundwise app, and then they'll see Tone Chaser, and they'll just go to Tone Chaser and order whichever book they like, and yes, and then it goes onto their phone, and it is theirs forever. They can play that 1,000 times. And yeah, it's theirs till the end of time. So
Perfect.
no one, right, it's not going
Yeah.
to disappear to anything.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I love audiobooks because I travel a lot. So I just jump in the car or, you can just be on a plane and you could play these things. So that's great. I want the audience to know how you actually met him. I know the story. So I love the story too. So can you just tell people your first day meeting him?
It's a pretty remarkable story. And to be honest, I'm not a big believer in kind of destiny or synchronicity, but I think over and over, well, what if I hadn't have been there at the whiskey that night? What if I wasn't there to see Cheap Trick record a live record? Would all of this have gone away? So I think, maybe there is a little bit of that in the universe. I'd like to think there is. So that being said, this is July 1977. I had been writing for about 4 years at that time. I had interviewed a lot of people before meeting Edward. I had interviewed Jeff Beck, and I had just interviewed John McLaughlin. I'd interviewed Joe Walsh. So I'd met some pretty heavy people. So when I was there and I ultimately meet Edward, I just thought of it as, well, it's another guitar player I'm meeting. I had no sense of really what was to come. So I'm there. I'm waiting for Cheap Trick to come on. They were recording this live record. It was like a record company promo recording. It wasn't live at Budokan, which would happen the next year, but it was just this little recording over the course of a weekend that the label wanted to do. Was probably like a little promotional giveaway. So I'm there, and my friend Michelle Meyer, who booked the Whiskey and various other clubs around town, comes up to me, and there's a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Michelle, and we knew each other. I loved Michelle. She she had helped my band. I had a band at the time called Deluge, sort of play in these various clubs. She booked a couple of the clubs around town. So I owed her. I loved her. I would do anything for her. And she said, listen, there's somebody upstairs I would like you to meet. So we walk up the whiskey stairs and we go into one of the dressing rooms, and the whiskey dressing room is a famous place. I mean, it's really like the bottom of a garbage pail. I mean, it's filthy and it reeks of cigarette smoke, and there's all these autographs on the walls of all the bands who played there. But it's a pretty famous dressing room, right? So I walk in and I see this tall, lanky guy with this amazing head of hair standing in the corner smoking a cigarette, and he would always be smoking a cigarette, sadly. And so Michelle walks over, and Edward sees him, and Edward obviously knew who Michelle was. And she says, Eddie Van Halen, Steve Rosen. And she says, Steve Rosen, Eddie Van Halen, Godhead. And I knew that Michelle calling someone Godhead was the ultimate praise. This was like only bestowed on those human beings that, were not of this earth, that she only reserved that moniker for the greatest of the great. So we shake hands, and I could tell that he wasn't expecting company. I mean, it's not like Michelle had gone up to him earlier in the night or something and said, hey, I'm going to bring this guy by, So I could tell he was sort of, in his own little world there. But, we shook hands, and I wish I could remember how the conversation started. Maybe I said, oh, hey, I'm a music journalist, or I'm not sure. One of the big things here that I think really led to what would become a pretty special relationship is that I really did not know who Edward Van Halen was. Look, Van Halen had been playing around town. They'd been playing the Whiskey and the Starwood. I knew the name Van Halen. I knew that this band Van Halen had scored a deal on Warner Brothers Records, but I had never seen the band play live before meeting him. And I think that also fed into it. And so again, this is July 77, about 8 months prior to the release of their first record in February 78. So me talking to Edward was just really talking to this guy who was in his local band who had got signed to Warner Brothers, which in and of itself was extraordinary to me. I mean, I thought, well, my goodness, them getting a deal on Warner Brothers, they have to be amazing, right? So we started talking, and Eric Clapton comes up. And Eric Clapton was one of my favorite guitar players. And it turned out that it was one of Edward's favorite guitar players. We talked about Jeff Beck, who was and still is my favorite guitar player, Ritchie Blackmore from Deep Purple. So we had all of these mutual guitar players that we loved, and it was just an incredible conversation, and I thought, God, this guy he's a really good guy. I can see how much he loves music. I can see the way he would talk about Eric. And, I asked him about the deal on Warner Brothers, and he was so humble about it. I'll tell you, man, if my band had scored a deal on Warner Brothers Records, I'd be going, hey, man, can you believe it? We got a deal on Warner's, man. We're going to be the biggest band in the freaking world, And he was the opposite. He was almost like shy about telling me about it. He goes, yes, we got a deal, and we recorded. I think we did a pretty good record, and I hope the record does okay. I mean, and that's who he would be, all the time I met him. That humility, and everybody talks about, oh, he was such a quiet, humble guy. Well, I saw it. I mean, I experienced it firsthand. And so we talked. Could have been a half hour, could have been an hour. And then he kind of, leaves the room unexpectedly, and he comes back, and I can see that he's got a pen in his hand. And he reaches down and retrieves some scrap of paper off the dingy whiskey carpeted floor, and he's writing something down, and he hands it to me, and I can see it's his phone number. And he goes, listen, man, I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope we can talk again. Give me a call. And that's where this 26-year friendship began. A pretty remarkable night.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
I really admire that because a lot of musicians, even early on, they're caught up in the experience, or they get caught up in the night, or there's a lot of moving pieces, before people are about to play or whatever. But the fact that he found like a connection with you, and he found like almost an instant friend, and you guys followed up on it. It's just incredible. I do believe in things, that are meant to be. There's many people that I've met, just by being, introduced to them, especially at shows, and you think, oh, they won't remember me. And then, you end up being friends for many, many years, so that's pretty incredible. I want to be able to get to some of these clips, though. You've provided graciously 6 of them, so we're going to go through each one. The first one I have listed as chapter 4. So we'll play the clip, and then we'll have you discuss the conversation or what happens in the clip. How's that?
Sounds great.
Okay, great.
Well, that last thing that you heard with the poppy one, that one we just wrote like 3 days ago in the studio. I just had this riff. Actually, here's how it used to go. It's just totally different, And, well, we just cut the fat off, made it simpler, and everybody goes, hey, it's called Dance the Night Away.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah. The second one is Somebody Get Me a Doctor.
Somebody Get Me a Doctor.
Which everyone again can relate to.
Which one was that?
Picks up my Stratocaster and plays the riff.
That one was written around the same time as Running with the Devil.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, it really is. So what you heard there is a little excerpt from chapter 4, which I titled in the book, How to Play Guitar Like Eddie Van Halen in One, parentheses, Not So, close parentheses, Easy Lesson. So this conversation actually took place on December 30th, 1978. Edward, for the first time, came over to my house. I lived in Laurel Canyon, which was one of the canyons up in the Hollywood Hills. So I lived about 9 minutes from where Edward lived. Edward lived in Coldwater Canyon. Coldwater Canyon was the expensive canyon, and Laurel Canyon was sort of the hippie bohemian canyon, right? The little log houses, and a lot of very famous musicians moved to Laurel Canyon because it was very close to Sunset Boulevard and the whiskey and all the clubs. So the Eagles hung out there, Mama Cass, Frank Zappa, John Mayall. There were a lot of musicians living there. So Edward Van Halen comes over to my house, comes over to my little guest house, and this is right before the second album was going to come out. He comes over, and the first thing he does is he walks in the house, and he sees my two guitars standing there, sitting there in the stand, and he starts dismantling this Stratocaster that I have. And he pulls off the knob, and he's doing stuff to it, and he says, "Hey, man, is it okay?" I mean, look, man, he could have taken the thing and turned it into kindling. I didn't care. This was Edward Van Halen over at my house, and you have to understand that first record had come out, and he was now arguably one of the biggest guitar players in the world. Even with just the first record out, he had made his name. So in reference specifically to this clip, Edward would come over to my place and he would play me unmixed versions of the records before they would come out. Typically on a cassette, would go down to his car and listen to these unmixed versions, typically without vocals. Sometimes I'm trying to remember, maybe even without drums and or bass. Then we'd come back into my little guest house, and he'd play me the riffs. He'd pick up one of my guitars, one of the electrics, and acoustically would play the riffs. So I'm sitting there, 2 feet away, watching him play these riffs that I just heard on the tape. And it was really nothing short of miraculous. I had mentioned earlier that I had interviewed a lot of guitar players previous to this, and I had the opportunity to sit there in dressing rooms or backstage or maybe in a conference room where these guitar players would have a guitar in their hand and they would be playing. And to see that up close was amazing. To watch some of these other guitar players, to watch Edward Van Halen play these riffs was magical. And honestly, I recognized at the time in 1978, I'm sitting there, I'm watching him play this riff from this song called Dance the Night Away, and then Somebody Get Me a Doctor. I knew in that moment how historic this moment was. I knew that this may never happen again. Maybe no other writer was ever going to have this opportunity. And I was so acutely aware of it, I tried to embed it in my head. Well, years go by and memories fade, but I really tried to capture that. And I wrote about it in the book and in this little excerpt here. I tried to document it as closely as I could. That was an amazing moment. That was a magical one for me, for sure.
That's great. So we're going to move on to chapter 5. So
Yep.
let me play that and then we'll discuss it.
Yep.
Regarding the palm muting, I told him,
That's great. I
See,
love that.
You don't.
How did you ever figure that
God,
out?
I don't know.
That's really incredible.
This finger thing too. You can do all kinds of crazy. You just do it anyway. Do anything.
I was enthralled by the immeasurable and unstoppable scope of his creativity. He noodled around for a few seconds, pushed down on his whammy bar, and asked me,
Is that thing staying tuned?
he was referencing my Strat, which I had been holding while we talked. Ed whipped through another blur of hammer-ons, and I quizzed him about that, and he stated,
You gotta hit it and pull. It's like, oh.
as if it was the simplest thing in the world, and anybody could do it.
Same thing. It's like having a sixth finger on his hand,
It's like having a sixth finger, which was a description of the technique he used on more than one occasion.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I'm sure a guitarist could really appreciate that.
This is another amazing chapter. So this one, as you referenced, Catherine, is chapter 5, and it's titled Van Halen 2, TOO. And this happened sometime in January 79. So the second album had been released. And again, he came over to Weepaw Way. Weepaw Way was the street I lived on up in Laurel Canyon, 1909 Weepaw Way. And he would come over to the pad. I think by 1979, even with the second record out, I think he was still living at home at his parents' house in Pasadena with Alex, his brother, which I thought was amazing. And I offered, certainly for that first interview, I offered to drive out to Pasadena. Driving from Pasadena to where I lived was about a 35-minute ride. I mean, it wasn't real far, but it was a schlep. And I thought, Edward Van Halen is going to drive out to my place. I'll happily drive out there. And he never seemed to mind. So for the second time, he drives out. And what I'm referencing at the beginning of this clip is all of these amazing techniques, and they were techniques, but he wouldn't even reference them as techniques. He would call them tricks, because in his mind, they were just these little throwaways, these little, digital gimmicks that he did with his fingers, and they were of no import. Well, they would become the vocabulary and lexicon for a whole generation of guitar players that followed. And what he's doing in that first little bit of the excerpt there is palm muting. And he had been doing that, and I asked him what it was, and you now hear guitar players all over the place doing it and trying to make it their own. Edward was one of the first people I ever heard do that, and really make it a part of guitar, of the guitar vocabulary, you know. And you literally put your palm across the strings, and then you run it down the strings, and it creates all these overtones and harmonics. But the way he did it was just so unbelievable, you know. And then he talks about, yeah, man, it's just a trick. So in his mind, you know, those are just little bits that he did. And then that second thing is him doing some whammy bar stuff with hammer-ons. And then when he's talking about the sixth finger, that's how he's describing eruption, which I think has now become the second most influential, important guitar solo of all time. I think Brian May's solo on Bohemian Rhapsody is considered the greatest solo of all time, which I wouldn't argue with. But everybody wanted to play Eruption. That became, you know, if you couldn't play Eruption, you know, you weren't worth anything as a guitar player. And so you have to understand that this is really early on. This is 79. But even in some of the earlier interviews that I did, he is talking about Eruption. And I'm pretty positive that was the first time he ever talked to anybody, certainly a journalist, about Eruption and what it was and how he was doing it. And there's so much more in this chapter, which you can hear in the audiobook and read about in Tone Chase the Hardback. One quick thing, there's a little bit in the chapter here a little bit later on, and he asks me, how old are you anyway? And I tell him I'm 25, and I tell him I was writing for a high school newspaper. And then he starts asking me all these questions about writing for Guitar Player, and, you know, did I ever get nervous talking to people, and this and that, you know. And then he says, I'm interviewing you, which I just thought that was an amazing thing to say. And I say, I love it, you know. And then he says, actually, I hate doing interviews. And he did. He never liked doing interviews, but our conversations were always so remarkable. And I think it just goes back to us kind of being friends and having this respect for each other. So, yeah, that's an amazing excerpt for sure.
Wow, I can't wait to get to the next clip. So the next clip is actually chapter 8. So we're going to take a listen now.
Whiskey was an old song, and we decided to do that, change that a bit with the acoustic intro.
And there he played the Gibson for the first time acoustically, and it sang.
You know, it's a little old blues feel. Everything else is new. It's only actually 2 songs in here that were worked out before we went into the studio. The rest is just done now.
He wanted me to understand exactly what he was doing by dissecting the riff and explaining precisely how he had conceived and developed the part.
Actually, that song has a lot of little tricks in it. Yeah. Guitar tricks. It starts out with this.
While we had been in the car listening to the tracks, Edward specifically pointed out the solo in and the Cradle Will Rock and told me he really liked what he had done.
What's that one little riff you said you liked in Cradle Will Rock? That
See,
one.
I don't even know how I did that. Just something like it. Yeah, that's all good.
Nice.
Wow. So that's recorded in the car. That's pretty incredible.
Actually, yeah, it's a little confusing. What I was referencing there is we listened to the tracks in the car, the unmixed tracks, and we were back in the house. So he's playing the guitar in my in the little Weepaway guest house there. So this is chapter 8, which I have called Women and Children, but first the bursts. And this happened sometime between December 13th to the 17th, 1979. just one quick side note here. So as I was going through my cassettes writing the book, I thought I was a pretty accurate historian and documentarian, that I had notated the dates of every interview I did with him. Well, I did not. For some stupid reason, I didn't put dates on a lot of those cassettes. So I would actually have to listen to the cassette and hear Edward reference something, a song title, which would tell me, oh, that's off the Women and Children First record that came out in 1980 or whatever it was. So this interview must have happened just prior to the release of the album. And I sort of had to reverse engineer how I came up with the dates. So that's why some of these dates say December 13th to the 17th, because I cannot pinpoint it down to a certain day. So what this chapter is about, and what that excerpt was, is Edward had played me some of the tracks from the Women and Children First record, which was a third record. And the first thing he played, which he called kind of a bluesy thing, was a song called Take Your Whiskey Home. And then he does those hammer things. And then he does the solo from, I forget which song he referenced there, but it's those last 5 notes, do, 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 which I just thought that was, it was just so brilliant and so symphonic and so moving that I actually write about it in the book, just those 5 notes, it's just amazing. It was just a side of the composer in him. It was just so beautiful. But another reason why this chapter is so incredible is, and I referenced there, that the Les Paul. So what you heard is him playing a Les Paul, and in fact 2 Les Pauls that he had just purchased. And when I say just purchased, I mean he may have bought them and came home with them an hour ago, and he drove immediately over to my pad to bring them over so I could see them. He had just bought 2 1959 Les Pauls, and he wanted to bring them over to the house to show me. These guitars were, my God, they were amazing. I mean, they were beautiful. They were rare and beautiful and just extraordinary. And so what you're hearing a little bit there is him playing one of the Les Pauls acoustically. What you're not hearing here, which you can hear in the actual audiobook, is Edward plugging one of the 59s into my Marshall stack. I had a Marshall stack there. I had actually gone to England, and I had had the amazing opportunity to interview Jim Marshall, and he had given me a tour of the Marshall factory, and he kindly and so graciously sold me a Marshall stack, which I had there in the house standing in a corner. So on this day, Edward walks over, takes the cord that I always had plugged into the Marshall. This is a Marshall stack, so the 2 cabinets and the Marshall 100 head is on top. So he plugs in, turns everything. It was like a Spinal Tap moment. Rolls everything to the right, puts everything on 10 volume, 10 tone, 10 mid, 10 bass, and noodles around for about, a minute or 2. And it is just the most amazing thing. And to my mind, it's worth the entire price of the audiobook. And he's just noodling around. And it's funny because at one point he asked me, the Marshall had a master volume on it. And he goes, what does a master volume do? Him asking me that would be like Van Gogh asking, some person who painted by numbers, well, what do you do with a paintbrush? I mean, it was amazing. It was like, my God, in fact, what I think is he had maybe never experienced a Marshall with a master volume, which was just amazing to me. And it's funny, what I thought was the most amazing guitar sound I'd ever heard. When it got done, I think I said, well, what do you think? He goes, yeah, it was okay, And then he said, yeah, man, you need to, you should play to one of my Marshalls. So that was
That's
the tone
funny.
chaser. That was Edward hearing his tone in his head. I thought that was
Wow.
so great.
I want to
Yeah.
get on to chapter 14. I mean, I want to get through all these clips, and they're just one amazing after another. So we're going to move
Yeah.
into chapter 14, which was called He Was Me. Here we go.
Yeah.
The tape ended there. The B-side of the cassette, recorded that day, was labeled Edward Van Halen Jamming. What I heard was Edward on bass jamming with some guitarist. It was obviously Ed playing bass. He was unmistakable. The jam began with Edward and that mystery player running through Jeff Beck's version of Superstition, and that sounded cool.
That's pretty incredible.
That's pretty amazing. This chapter really was amazing. As you mentioned, Catherine, this is chapter 14 in the book called He Was Me. This happened in May '82. So we had done an interview for somebody, something. I can't remember what. I'm listening to the cassette, and we're talking, and I'm writing the story, and then again I turn the cassette over, and I hear this guitar and bass, and again it was labeled Edward Van Halen Jam or whatever that was, and I'm listening to it and I'm going, what is this? I immediately recognized Edward playing bass. That was unmistakable. Edward was a huge fan of Tim Bogert and John Entwistle, and that's how he played bass. An amazing bass player. And I'm listening to the guitar player and thinking, wow, that guy's not bad. Who could it be? But then I thought, why would I have a recording of Edward on this cassette with my interview on the back with some other guitar player? It just didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't remember being up at his place, up at 5150, which had been built by this time, and the building, the construction had started. Why would I have recorded Edward playing bass with some other guitar player? I just wouldn't have done it. And then I'm listening, I'm going, oh my God, He Was Me. That was me playing guitar. Honestly, I did not recognize me playing guitar. I'm a decent guitar player at best, but for some reason I sounded okay. And there's this jam with Edward on bass and me on guitar. And again, we play that riff from Jeff Beck, Superstition, and then we just kept jamming. What
Very
was so
cool.
poignant about this, just real quickly, at the end of it, he reached in, because he records everything, and he reached in and he gave me the cassette because he knew what it meant to me. One, to be jamming with him, and two, to go home with that cassette. And that was who he was. That spoke so much about him. So pretty amazing.
Wow, that really is. We're going to move into chapter 34, which says Candle Ashtray.
The licks he contributed were genius and nothing less. I don't know of any other way to describe it, because in one breath, there was this rhythmic counterpart happening, and the music soared and flew off the tape. He had managed to unlock the true heart and soul of the track, which was something I had been trying to do for weeks, and without even listening to it one time front to back, Edward had turned a sleepy ballad into something oozing heaviness. I heard Believe, the song Ron and I had been working on, and there was Edward playing the most beautifully structured phrases.
Wow.
So this is so the previous chapter, you hear Edward and I jamming. Well, this goes one step beyond that. So this is chapter 34, which I've called Candle Ashtray. This happened on September 5th, 1985. I know the specific date because this one was labeled. Real quickly, Candle Ashtray is a reference. When Edward would come over to the house, he always smoked. And as I mentioned at the outside of our conversation, he smoked, and this is no exaggeration, every single moment I was with him, he smoked. And he smoked and he smoked and he smoked, and it was terrible. and it was horrible, but that's who he was. So he would come over to the house, and if he didn't have a cigarette in hand, he would always light one up. I think I had an ashtray. I think I'd stolen an ashtray from the whiskey, but I didn't smoke, so it's not like I had ashtrays around. But I had this big candle, like this huge oversized candle that had burned down a bit and hollowed out. And so I used this candle as an ashtray, and he referenced it as the candle ashtray. So he comes over. This is in the evening. I was there with my buddy Ron De La Vega, and we were working on a song I had written. Ron was a very talented bass player, cello player, and keyboard player, and we were working on one of my songs called Believe. Ron is playing keyboards, I am playing guitar. There's a knock at the door, and I open it up, and it's Edward. Edward would do the Jerry Seinfeld pop in a lot. He just drove over, and again, he was only a few minutes away, and he sees instantly that we were recording. There's a little Fostex 4-track, and my first thought is, oh my God, Ron and I are recording, and Edward's here. It's like, oh my, what do we do? I can't record or play in front of him, and but he just sat down, and he just seemed so casual and relaxed about it. Ron and I kept working. At a point in time, and it wasn't long after we started doing it, he says, hey man, you mind if I play a little bit? And Ron and I look at each other and go, no, Edward, it's okay if you play. So he takes my guitar and he starts playing over this song, and he had never heard the song, and he starts playing these riffs, and I reference in the excerpt that he starts doing these rhythmic things, and these were really Van Halen-esque rhythm things, and it added soul and muscle to the track, and he starts doing his little solo bits, and Edward Van Halen is in my little guest house playing over one of my songs. Well, these were moments that I thought, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And there's so much more I could tell you about it. You need to listen to the audiobook and read the chapter. But this was a very, very special moment.
Wow, absolutely. I know as we move on to our last clip, which I feel I need to definitely hear more, this is chapter 62, The Day the Music Cried. So we're going to play that now.
I mean, Van Halen is and always will be Alex and I. And I'm leaving Wolfie and Alex's son Eric, who's 13, guitar lessons. Both of them sing. Both of them are incredibly talented. And I guarantee you that by the time they're 17, the real Van Halen's going to make a record.
Really?
2 fathers, 2 sons. Because between the 4 of us, we'll be able to play anything. I can play bass, guitar, cello, piano, drums, you name it. Wolfie, I tell you, man, if you're not looking, and you face the other way, I've heard so many people, including myself, sit, everyone from Carmine Appice to myself, you name it, sit behind Al's kit and play, and it just doesn't sound like Al. Wolfie, you can't tell the difference.
He's got that thing, huh?
He sounds more like Bonham than Bonham himself. I hear him playing. Oh, there's the 2 kick drums. He's going with 1 foot.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's Eddie talking about his son, and just incredible.
It is. And so this is our last excerpt here. This is chapter 62, The Day the Music Cried. This happened on August 13th, 2003. This was a terrible chapter to write. This was incredibly hard. By 2003, and I don't want to give the book away, but the relationship between Edward and me, I always get that confused, had changed. But on a positive note, this is probably, and I wouldn't swear by this, but I'm pretty certain this is the first time he ever talked about Wolf sort of in the public light. Certainly he, obviously Valerie and Alex and maybe some family members. But at this point, I think Wolf was 11, if I'm correct, 11, 12, somewhere around there. And Edward's already talking about his musical abilities. And there's another little piece there which you don't hear, which you can hear if you get the audiobook, is this little piece of Wolf playing drums. And he is extraordinary for an 11-year-old kid, or 13 or whatever it was. It's remarkable. So Edward is talking about Wolf and how amazing he is. And he's talking about maybe there's going to be a band of Edward and Alex. Alex's son was also a musician, and Wolf, where they could play all these instruments, keyboards and drums and bass and cello, and Al played violin, et cetera, et cetera. So again, my relationship had changed. I was going to work on a Van Halen documentary, and I wanted to talk to Edward about it. And the chapter closes by Edward saying, "Hey, come up on Monday." So this is a Saturday or a Sunday, I can't remember. And I say, "You want me to come by on Monday?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Is that cool?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I say, "Okay, man." And he says, "Okay, bye." Monday rolls around. And as I would always do when I was going to go up to 5150 and see Edward, I would just call before I was leaving the house. It just became a habit. Sometimes he'd be out in the studio working, or he wouldn't be home. And that was just who he was. And I got used to that. But this time I just wanted to check because, I knew he was going to be there, but I just wanted to be sure. So I was actually out the door, but I walked back in and I call and there's no answer. And I call 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 and there's no answer. And that was sort of the end of the relationship. I don't want to give the book away, but that was a sad day. And what began as this beautiful, shining, bright, amazing friendship turned into something that was kind of dark and sorrowful. But to really understand it, and again, I'm not trying to sell books, but it's all in the book, and it's all in the audiobook. So yeah.
Well, it's your story to tell, and I always find that interesting through time how relationships and friendships change. Even within families, people change. But in reflection of your 26-year friendship with Eddie, other than learning, incredible guitar tips and tricks that he was doing, what did you feel that you learned most from Eddie?
That's a great question, Catherine. And honestly, like as I mentioned before, I was only a mediocre guitarist. So he would show me things, on the guitar, which I couldn't play. They were fascinating to watch and stuff. What becomes amazing is so many guitar players have come to me and said, "Man, you have no idea when I hear these little bits of Edward playing guitar and him talking about it and reading about it in your book, how much that has revealed to me, and all those secrets." I mean, these hardcore guitar players, excellent guitar players, how much they learned by Edward showing me this stuff and playing this stuff for me. So that was so heartening to hear. What I learned from Edward, honestly, is or what I felt from him at the end of the day was he was so sure of who he was without being this ego-driven person. He just knew who he was. And even before that first record comes out, he's just so confident. And I was about the most unconfident person who walked the face of the earth. I've never had that in me. And he instilled that in me, or he tried to. And that's what I came away with. He had just so much respect, and he talked to me in such a positive way, and it was never belittling or insulting. And he could have been, just like any friends would be towards each other, but he was always so supportive of me, and that's what I walk away with, and that's what I come away with, and I hate to use the cliche, and did I come away feeling a little better about myself? I mean, I did. It was terrible the way things ended, but for the most part, it was this amazing odyssey. And just him being so sure of himself and being around that, it's like you felt that, and that's kind of what I came away with. And I think that's what people get from him, and that's why he's one in a million, because it's not just the music, but he transcends all that. You feel something in his heart, and his soul and his passion, and it touches you in a way that other musicians, they just can't reach that part. So he was special for sure.
Wow. I can't thank you enough for doing this interview and also giving us a different perspective of the Eddie Van Halen that many of us didn't get to know personally like you. And for providing these generous clips, giving us kind of a peek into your audiobook. And I'm going to run out and get both of them today because they are different, like you said, So I think purchasing both of them is really important. Is that what you advise?
Honestly, I would, because they're entirely different. The first one is me and Edward, and the second one are all these really amazing interviews, again with Alex and Michael, going back to 1986, and old vintage stuff, not new stuff, not newer stuff, and interviews with his guys he was in bands with. Kevin Hill, who was in a band with him called the Broken Combs when they were kids. I mean, the insights and his contemporaries. I really think the second audiobook is fantastic as well. So
okay,
yeah,
great.
check them both out.
So just plug where we can find all of your social media, your website, and the audios.
So honestly, I can never remember the actual addresses for my Facebook, but if you just type in Steve Rosen Tone Chaser, you will find it. My Instagram is Steve Rosen Guitar Picks, and you can find me there. YouTube, again, if you just type in Tone Chaser Steve Rosen, you can find it there. And if you're interested in finding the book, you can find the book at tonechaserbook.com, and it's also on Amazon, eBay, and Reverb. Just type in Tone Chaser when you guys are over there. So it's all over the place.
Okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on, Steve, and I look forward to listening to the rest of these clips, listening to you and Eddie Van Halen.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Wonderful speaking with you again. You take care.
Thank you. You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium, Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.